That was former President Trump, who now becomes the first president ever to be convicted of a felony, all 34 counts. Former president was convicted in a New York court, and just making some comments there, unsurprisingly talking about how he is going to fight that verdict. Sentencing, I'm seeing now, has been set for July 11th. Now, whether he will be, as we discussed, sent to some kind of detention following that as he does appeal, probably unlikely, but nonetheless, that's when the sentencing will be happening. So just an unprecedented, historic day as we look at the outcome of this trial. We've been speaking with Henrietta Treyz of Veda Partners, as well as our own Rick Newman. Henrietta, I wanted to take it back to you because as you talked about, and as we have talked about, this won't necessarily dent the true believers. It might hurt some of his standing along with swing voters. I am very curious what this does, if anything, to some of his high-profile donors. I'm thinking of the Steve Schwartzmans of the world. I'm thinking of the report that I saw today that Bill Ackman was considering supporting Donald Trump. Now, you know, these folks are businessmen, right? They have become perhaps more ideologically aligned with the Trump presidency. But does this sway people like that at all?
I sincerely doubt it. I think it's really notable that they were very aware that this verdict was coming, and they probably knew it was coming today or tomorrow, and they have actively gone out to rally behind him, as did Nikki Haley, for example, and all the rest. So I think he's been building up his donors, and at least some of these 35 counts were going to come back guilty. I think it was the base case expectation for all of them to come back guilty, as I mentioned before, is the worst case scenario that I could have envisioned for Trump. So I don't think he will lose any support from the high dollar donators, obviously Elon Musk. But I would note, and this is something I talk about with my clients just recently, Trump outraised Biden in the last month of the election cycle. And it's really important to look at where those donations come from, because everybody in America only gets one vote, no matter how many dollars they give to Donald Trump. So we saw this with Ron DeSantis, for example, during the primary season. He was able to get tons of money in $196 million, but just from a couple of donors, big ticket donors. In Trump's case, for the month of April, which was his record fundraising haul, those donations came from 18 people at one event, $50 million worth. So he does have these mega donors, but he does not have the small dollar donors. And again, everybody gets one vote no matter how much money you give. And that's really important to think about here from a donor perspective, and contrast materially with Joe Biden, who is getting about 45% of his donations from small dollar donors versus 31% from Trump.
Rick, let's bring you back in here. We did just hear from Trump. Strong response. This was rigged, he said, a disgrace. The real decision, he notes, is coming in November. Said he's an innocent man. This is Biden trying to hurt an opponent. What did you make of those comments?
Well, just a little fact checking on that uplifting rhetoric we got from Trump there. He said Biden did this. This is Biden going after him. This is not the federal government. Biden actually has nothing to do with this. They've used some evidence from the Michael Cohen trial, which the Justice Department prosecuted when Trump was president. But this is the New York City district attorney. It literally has nothing to do with the Biden administration or the federal government. So again, just basic things for people to keep in mind. I'd like to ask another question and maybe bring this back to Henrietta. I wonder what Biden can do to take advantage of this. Now, there's been all this discussion about will Biden start weighing on this, trolling Trump in some way, or figuring out how to use it to his advantage. I wonder if, going back to this question about the donors and just about centrist voters who are the real swing voters here. A lot of people have been waiting for Biden to move to the center, which is what, a Democratic candidate might typically do in a presidential election. He hasn't really done that. He hasn't said anything, for example, about the border problem, which Trump just referenced. Is there something Biden can do, Henrietta, to exploit this at a policy level rather than a personal level, mano a mano with Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think the first thing the Biden administration should do is point out that over month, immigration is down more than 50% at the border right now. And that is a 3-month-long running trend from February. You'll probably recall that we've been waiting for an executive order from the administration on immigration, especially since The Senate has not been able to pass its bipartisan immigration reform bill that would diminish migration at the border. But the reason that the Biden administration hasn't had to pass any asylum executive orders is because the border is being so adequately controlled at this exact moment. They are at 3 consecutive running months of decline, 52%, I believe, 56% in the last month alone. So I think if the Biden administration could get out and actually speak to some of the gains in the Dow, the fact that inflation is amongst the lowest in the world, get any of their messaging across would be a huge boon. Indeed, I think this is one of the major reasons the Biden administration decided to put a debate on June 27th so much earlier, 3 months earlier than it's usually held, is because they literally are not breaking through to these undecided or moderate voters. The reality is that most voters have a disapproval rating that's well underwater of both of these men. And Biden needs to really get out into the center. Being anti-China, putting 100% tariffs on electric vehicles is very promising for, or very well received by the swing states in the Rust Belt area. The declassification of marijuana is another one, and I expect Democrats would focus on, for example, the extreme legislation the Louisiana legislature just passed on basic miscarriage medicine that's used in 63% of abortions nationwide. So I think there's a lot of things they could point to. I don't think those are necessarily overly leftist, and they have some really good news that they could use on the immigration front to combat the #1 talking point that Trump just came out with himself to use as his rationale for reelection.
Henrietta, finally, we're showing scenes outside the courthouse. There obviously a pretty big police presence. Trump has a lot of supporters in the streets. We showed some folks who were anti-Trump as well. Any concern about civil unrest in the wake of this verdict, do you think?
I hear that all the time. I hear it just casually on the street. I live in Louisiana, and I hear it, down in the Gulf of Mexico this weekend. People very concerned that the November 5th election will result in massive civil unrest. That is something that Donald Trump is actively saying will occur should there be an election that he doesn't win in November. So I think that is something that registers. When you see it on the polls, it's the question of what is the state of democracy? That's how the question is phrased. And that could be any number of things. It could be, are you on the side of the January 6th insurrectionists? And do you think that they are patriots that are being imprisoned against their will? Or do you think Donald Trump fomented an insurrection on January 6th? It really is an all-encompassing concern for Americans across the country. And like I said, I hear it all the time from casual observers who maybe do not want to be swayed or will not be swayed by the outcome of this election. They're very concerned about civil unrest. And I think you see that in every state nationwide.
Henrietta, thank you so much for jumping on and reacting to this historic verdict. Really appreciate it.